The inside of Ani Folake's apartment was nothing like the spaces Prisca had inhabited her entire life. There were no marble floors, no designer furniture, no expensive artwork adorning walls. Only a small kerosene stove in the corner, a low wooden stool that had seen better days, and a thin mat spread on the concrete floor. A single plastic bucket sat near the tiny bathroom, half filled with water. The air smelled of kerosene, old fabric, and something indefinable. Poverty, perhaps, or simply the absence of luxury. Prisca stood at the entrance, uncertainty flooding through her. This was not a place for someone who'd grown up in Ikoyi penthouses and luxury apartments. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to find another solution, any other solution. Ani Folake closed the door behind her with a decisive click. "Sit," the old woman said, gesturing to the mat. Prisca lowered herself carefully onto the rough surface, her body already protesting. The mat was thin, offering almost no cushioning against the hard floor. Her knees ached immediately. Her heart thudded with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She waited for magic words, for prayers that would instantly restore everything, for some quick ritual that would make her beautiful again and send her back to her comfortable life. Instead, Ani Folake sat across from her on the wooden stool and said something that made Prisca's stomach drop. "From this moment forward, your life will no longer revolve around you alone." Prisca swallowed hard, nodding. "You will live as those you once despised live," the old woman continued, her voice steady and unyielding. "You will serve where you once commanded. You will carry burdens that aren't yours. You will greet people you once ignored. You will value people you once dismissed. And you will do all of this not for show, not for performance, but because your heart has genuinely changed." Prisca nodded again, more vigorously. "I understand. I'm ready." The old woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "We'll see. Words are cheap. Tomorrow before dawn, your transformation begins." That night, Prisca slept on the thin mat in the corner of the tiny apartment. The floor was unforgiving beneath her. The sounds of Suralere at night, generators humming, neighbors arguing through thin walls, dogs barking, the constant rumble of Lagos that never truly sleeps, kept her awake for hours. She lay staring at the cracked ceiling, illuminated by streetlight filtering through a small window, and wondered what she had committed herself to. Her body, accustomed to luxury mattresses and climate-controlled comfort, protested every position she tried. When sleep finally came, it was fitful and filled with anxious dreams. Before dawn, while Lagos still slept in that brief moment of relative quiet between midnight chaos and morning mayhem, Ani Folake shook Prisca awake roughly. "Rise," she said firmly. "The day doesn't wait for those who sleep in comfort." Prisca groaned softly, her entire body aching from the hard floor. Every muscle complained. Her neck was stiff. Her back throbbed. She sat up slowly, disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. Reality crashed back immediately. Ani Folake handed her a battered yellow plastic jerry can with a cracked handle. "You will fetch water," she said simply. "From the public borehole 3 streets away." Prisca stared at the jerry can. Fetch water. That was work for house helps, for the poor, for people who had no choice. Her pride stirred weakly, making one last desperate attempt at resistance. But she remembered why she was here. She remembered the marks spreading across her skin, the nightmares stealing her sleep, the life crumbling around her like sand castles at high tide. She stood up without jewelry, without makeup, without any of the armor she'd worn her entire life. Just her simple clothes and her changing face and her desperate hope. She followed Ani Folake outside into the pre-dawn chill of Lagos. The air was cooler than daylight but already carried hints of the heat to come. The streets were relatively empty, only early morning traders heading to markets, night shift workers returning home, street sweepers beginning their invisible work. The walk to the public borehole felt longer than it was. Prisca's expensive shoes, still clinging to some remnant of her former life, weren't designed for this kind of walking. They pinched. They rubbed. Blisters formed. When they arrived, a small crowd had already gathered, mostly women and young girls with various containers, waiting their turn. They glanced at Prisca curiously. Some recognized her despite her changed appearance and simple clothes. Whispers started immediately. Is that not the proud Prisca from Okoye? What is she doing here? See how she has fallen. Auntie Folake pointed to the borehole. Fill it, she said calmly, ignoring the whispers. Prisca approached the manual pump, watching how others did it. She placed her jerry can beneath the spout and began pumping the handle. The mechanism was stiff, requiring genuine strength. Water came slowly, grudgingly. Her arms burned within minutes. Sweat broke out across her forehead despite the cool air. The plastic handle cut into her soft palms, hands that had never done manual labor, that had only held phones, makeup, expensive handbags. When the jerry can was finally full, she tried to lift it. The weight shocked her completely. Her arms trembled. Her back strained. She staggered, water sloshing over the edge, soaking her clothes. Auntie Folake didn't move to help. Lift it, she said quietly but firmly. Prisca gritted her teeth and tried again. She managed to hoist the jerry can onto her head. She'd seen women do this effortlessly her entire life, never realizing the skill and strength required. The weight pressed down on her neck like a physical punishment. Her legs trembled. The walk back was torture that redefined her understanding of the word. Her neck throbbed with each step. Her legs felt like they might collapse. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge. Other women passed her carrying similar loads with apparent ease, some even chatting casually, and their effortlessness made her struggle feel even more humiliating. By the time they reached Auntie Folake's apartment, Prisca's entire body screamed in protest. She dropped the jerry can just inside the door and collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, her muscles burning with lactic acid. Auntie Folake looked down at her without sympathy. This is how many women live every single day of their lives, she said quietly. Did you ever notice them before? Did you ever appreciate what they carried? Prisca shook her head weakly, unable to form words. No, she finally whispered. I never noticed. I never saw them as human beings with struggles. They were just background. They were invisible to you, Auntie Folake corrected, because you only saw yourself. The words landed like stones in water, creating ripples of recognition. After days of fetching water until her hands developed calluses, sweeping the compound until her back ached permanently, cooking simple meals over a kerosene stove that left her eyes burning from smoke, washing clothes by hand until her knuckles bled, and doing chores she'd never touched in her privileged life, Auntie Folake gave Prisca a new instruction. You will go into the streets and help where help is needed. Prisca froze, her hands still submerged in soapy water where she'd been washing dishes. The streets? She asked quietly, fear creeping into her voice. Where people can see me? Yes. In public. Where people will recognize you and remember who you were. Terror crawled up Prisca's spine like cold fingers. What would people say? What would they do when they saw her like this, stripped of pride, stripped of beauty, reduced to manual labor? But she had made a commitment. She had promised anything. She stepped onto the familiar streets of Lagos that suddenly felt like foreign territory. The same city that once stopped for her now barely noticed her presence. She was just another woman in simple clothes, her face marked with dark patches, her hands roughened by work. At a busy intersection in Yaba, she saw an elderly woman struggling with a heavy basin of tomatoes, the vendor's shoulders bent under the weight, her steps slow and painful. Prisca approached hesitantly. Ma, let me help you carry that, she said softly. The woman turned, her eyes widening in surprise and recognition. Prisca, she said, disbelief coloring her voice. The Prisca from Okoye? Prisca lowered her head, shame burning her cheeks. Yes, Ma. The woman laughed, a loud, sharp sound without warmth. So, even you now carry loads for others? She said loudly enough for nearby people to hear. The mighty have truly fallen. Other market women turned to look. Whispers spread like wildfire through dry grass. Is that not the proud one who used to walk past without greeting? What happened to her beautiful face? They say she insulted an old woman and got cursed. Pride goes before a fall, as they say. Prisca felt heat rise to her marked cheeks, felt the familiar urge to snap back with cutting words, to remind them who she was, or who she'd been. But she swallowed the impulse. She bit down hard on her pride.
"Please, Ma," she said again.
"Let me help you." The woman studied her suspiciously, searching for mockery or hidden motives. Finding only genuine humility, she finally nodded. "Take it then. Let's see if you can actually be useful." Prisca lifted the heavy basin. It was heavier than it looked, at least 20 kilograms of tomatoes, the metal basin cutting into her already rough palms. Her arms trembled immediately as she followed the woman through the crowded market. People stared. Some pointed. Some whispered behind cupped hands. Some laughed openly. "See how the mighty have fallen," one young girl said loudly to her friend. "My mother always said pride is a dangerous thing," another voice agreed. The words cut deep, each one a small blade finding tender places. Prisca's throat tightened with unshed tears. But she kept walking, kept carrying the burden, kept her head down. When they reached the woman's market stall, Prisca gently placed the basin down with trembling arms. Her muscles screamed. Sweat soaked through her simple clothes. "Thank you," the woman said, still shaking her head in wonder. "I never thought I would see this day." Prisca bowed slightly, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she turned to leave, a group of young women, girls who once desperately wanted to be her friends, who had copied her style and hung on her every word, laughed behind her back. "See how the proud one now carries loads like a house help," one said loudly enough to ensure Prisca heard. "My auntie always said beauty doesn't last forever," another added. "Character is what remains." Prisca kept walking, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall in public. The humiliation felt like physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. One evening, after another exhausting day of serving others, Auntie Folake served a thin, watery gari, cassava flour mixed with water to form a paste. No soup, no meat, no vegetables. Just the plain starch that poor Nigerians ate when they had nothing else. Prisca stared at the small bowl. "This is all?" she asked quietly, her stomach already growling. "Yes," Auntie Folake replied simply. "Eat and be grateful." Prisca obeyed, swallowing the bland paste that did little to satisfy her genuine hunger. That night, lying on the thin mat with her stomach still empty and uncomfortable, she thought about the countless times she'd rejected food because it wasn't prepared to her exact specifications, wasn't expensive enough, wasn't presented beautifully enough. She remembered seeing poor people in markets eating simple meals and dismissing them as ignorant for accepting so little. Now she understood. Hunger isn't weakness or lack of ambition. Hunger is genuine suffering that makes you grateful for any sustenance. The next morning at the public borehole, while waiting in line to fetch water, she noticed a small boy sitting alone on the ground nearby, watching people with hollow eyes. His clothes were torn and filthy. His ribs showed through his thin chest. Flies gathered around his face, and he lacked the energy to brush them away. "Why are you sitting here?" Prisca asked gently, approaching him after filling her jerry can. "I'm waiting for my mother," he replied in a small voice. "But she hasn't come since yesterday." Something twisted painfully inside Prisca's chest, a feeling she couldn't immediately name. Empathy, perhaps. Compassion. The ability to see someone else's suffering as equally important as her own. She remembered Auntie Folake's words, "You will carry burdens that aren't yours." She took the small portion of bread Auntie Folake had given her for breakfast, her only food until evening, and offered it to the boy.
"Here.
Eat this." He stared at it with wide, disbelieving eyes. "For me," he whispered.
"Yes."
"Take it." He ate slowly, carefully, as if the bread might disappear if he moved too quickly. As Prisca watched him, something fundamental shifted inside her heart. For the first time in her 20 years of existence, she didn't see herself first. She saw someone else's pain and felt it as deeply as her own. This small moment, this simple act of giving up her own food, mattered more than all her previous beauty and wealth combined. A few days later, Prisca encountered a woman she recognized immediately, a widow named Mrs. Okonkwo who sold vegetables in Tejuosho Market. Months earlier, before everything changed, Mrs. Okonkwo had approached Prisca at a social event, desperately asking for a small loan of 50,000 naira to restock her market stall after thieves had stolen her capital. Prisca had laughed cruelly in her face. "Go ask your dead husband for money," she'd said loudly enough for others to hear, knowing full well the woman was a widow. "Oh wait, he can't help you because he's gone. Maybe you should have chosen a husband who actually provided for his family." Mrs. Okonkwo had gone away in tears, while Prisca's friends laughed at her wit. Now, months later, Prisca found Mrs. Okonkwo sitting alone at her nearly empty market stall, staring at the handful of wilted vegetables she had left to sell. Her face was drawn with worry. Her clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost weight from stress and hunger. Prisca's heart pounded as memories of her cruelty crashed over her like a wave. She wanted to walk away, to avoid this confrontation, to pretend she hadn't seen the woman. But that was the old Prisca, the one who ran from consequences. She approached slowly, her steps hesitant. "Mrs. Okonkwo," she said softly. The woman looked up. Recognition flashed in her eyes immediately, followed by undisguised anger that twisted her features. "You," she spat the word like poison. "What do you want from me now? Come to insult me again? Make more jokes about my dead husband?" Prisca swallowed hard, forcing herself not to retreat.
No, Ma.
"I came to say, I'm sorry." The words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, like speaking a language she'd never learned. Mrs. Okonkwo scoffed bitterly. "Sorry? Sorry will not feed my children. Sorry will not pay the rent I owe. Sorry will not erase what you said about my husband in front of all those people." "I know," Prisca said quietly, tears forming in her eyes. "I know sorry isn't enough. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot take back those cruel words. But if you'll allow me, I want to help you now." Mrs. Okonkwo stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against concrete. People at nearby stalls turned to watch, sensing drama. "Help me? Where was your help when I begged you? When I humbled myself before you? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made me feel like nothing, like my husband's death was somehow my fault, like my poverty made me less than human." Other vendors gathered closer, forming a small crowd. The air felt charged with tension. Prisca felt the familiar heat of shame spreading through her body. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to make excuses, to run away from this public humiliation. But she didn't. She bowed her head instead. "You're right," she said, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. I was cruel beyond measure. I broke something in you that day, and I deserve every bit of your anger. I'm not asking you to forgive me, because I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm only asking you to let me try to do better now." Silence fell over the gathering crowd. Even the usual market noise seemed to diminish. Mrs. Okonkwo's shoulders shook. Her eyes filled with tears that she'd been holding back for months. "You destroyed my dignity," she whispered. "People still remind me of what you said. They still laugh about it." Prisca's own eyes burned with tears. "I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply sorry." They stood there for a long moment, the widow and the former beauty queen, both broken by life in different ways, both crying in a crowded Lagos market. Finally, Mrs. Okonkwo spoke, her voice barely audible. "If you truly want to change, if this isn't just performance, then help me carry my things home today. Let people see the proud Prisca carrying a poor widow's load." Prisca nodded immediately, relief flooding through her. "I will. Thank you for giving me this chance." She lifted Mrs. Okonkwo's heavy baskets without complaint and walked beside her through Tejuosho Market, past hundreds of staring vendors and shoppers. People stopped mid-transaction to watch. Conversations halted mid-sentence. "Is that Prisca from Ikoyi carrying loads? The same one who insulted this woman months ago? Something has truly humbled her." Prisca heard every whisper, felt every stare, but she kept walking with her head down, carrying the widow's burden literally and symbolically. Something in the atmosphere of Lagos began to shift, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface. Prisca, who once demanded respect through fear, was now earning something different, not admiration, but a kind of cautious acknowledgement that perhaps people could change. Prisca continued her work. She fetched water for elderly neighbors who could barely walk. She cleaned the compounds of those too sick to do it themselves. She helped market women carry their heavy loads. She shared her meager food with street children. She greeted people she'd once ignored, spoke kindly to those she'd once dismissed. Her hands became truly rough, the skin thick with calluses. Her body grew lean and strong from hard labor rather than soft from luxury. She collapsed exhausted every night on the thin mat, sometimes too tired to even speak. And still, the curse didn't fully lift. Her skin improved slightly. The dark marks faded a bit, but she didn't return to her former flawless perfection. Her life didn't suddenly become easy. Money remained tight. Comfort remained elusive. At times, frustration rose in her chest like bile. One night, after a particularly difficult day where multiple people had rejected her attempts to help, suspecting ulterior motives, she turned to Auntie Folake with tears streaming down her marked face. "I'm doing everything you asked," she said through sobs. "I'm serving. I'm humble. I'm helping people. Why is nothing changing? Why is the curse still here?" Auntie Folake looked at her quietly, her elderly eyes holding ancient wisdom. Because genuine change is not a performance, child. It's a journey. Transformation doesn't happen in days or weeks. It happens in years, in decades, in lifetimes. You spent 20 years building walls around your heart. Those walls don't crumble overnight. Prisca covered her face with her work-roughened hands. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm tired of struggling. I'm tired of people looking at me with suspicion. I'm tired of being poor and hungry and exhausted." "So are millions of people who don't complain," Auntie Folake replied gently but firmly. "So are the women you once dismissed. So are the street children you once ignored. Welcome to the reality most Lagosians live every single day." Prisca lowered her head, feeling the truth of those words settle in her bones. She realized something painful. She had always wanted results without patience, wanted transformation without process, wanted redemption without genuine suffering. Now she was learning endurance. Now she was learning that character is built slowly, painfully, through countless small choices to do right when doing wrong would be easier. One afternoon in Yaba Market, Prisca approached a group of market women, offering to help them move their goods to a safer location. There had been warnings about thieves targeting that particular area. She'd heard the news and wanted to help. One woman sneered at her immediately. "We don't need your help," she said loudly. "Go show your fake kindness elsewhere." "I'm not being fake," Prisca said quietly. "I genuinely want to help." "Save it," another woman interrupted. "We know your type. You think people will forget who you were because you're acting humble now? We remember. We remember every insult, every cruel word, every time you looked through us like we were invisible." The words struck hard, each one finding its target. Prisca stood there, uncertain what to do or say. Her old self would have exploded with anger, would have walked away with her head held high, would have insulted them back with even crueler words. But she did neither. She bowed slightly instead. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. "I cannot erase my past. I cannot make you forget who I was. All I can do is try, every single day, to be better than I was yesterday. I understand if you don't trust me. I understand if you never forgive me. But I won't stop trying to help people, because that's who I'm learning to become." She turned and walked away slowly, her shoulders straight despite the rejection. Behind her, the market women fell silent. They had expected anger, defensiveness, the return of the proud Prisca they all knew. Instead, they'd witnessed genuine humility, and it confused them. That night, Prisca returned to Auntie Folake's tiny apartment, completely exhausted emotionally and physically. She sank onto the mat without speaking, tears slipping from her eyes. "I'm changing," she whispered into the darkness. "I can feel it inside me. But people still hate me. They still remember who I was and refuse to see who I'm becoming. Auntie Folake sat beside her, her elderly hand gentle on Prisca's shoulder. Forgiveness is not owed to you, child, she said softly. It's something you earn through time and consistency. Some people may never forgive you, and you must accept that as a consequence of your choices. But you don't transform for their forgiveness. You transform because it's the right thing to do. Prisca sobbed harder. I don't want to be that girl anymore. I don't want to be proud and cruel and blind to other people's suffering. I just want to be human, genuinely human. Auntie Folake squeezed her shoulder gently. That is the first truly honest prayer you have ever spoken. For a long time, they sat together in the small apartment while Lagos hummed its eternal song outside. Generators, traffic, humanity struggling and surviving and occasionally thriving. And in that shared silence, something inside Prisca broke completely. Not in pain, but in surrender. She surrendered her need to be special. She surrendered her addiction to being noticed. She surrendered her belief that her value came from her appearance. She surrendered everything she'd clung to for 20 years. And in the emptiness that surrender created, something new began, very slowly, to grow. The next morning, as Prisca washed her face at the public tap, she noticed something in her wavering reflection. The dark marks on her skin were fading, not dramatically, but noticeably. The shadows that had seemed permanent were lightening, like storm clouds gradually parting. She leaned closer, her breath catching. Her fingers traced her cheek gently, hardly daring to believe. She ran back to Auntie Folake's apartment, nearly tripping in her excitement. Auntie, look, she called, pointing to her face. The old woman studied her carefully, a small knowing smile appearing on her weathered lips. The heart has begun to genuinely change, she said quietly. And so the body follows. But do not mistake this for completion. This is merely confirmation that you're on the right path. Tears filled Prisca's eyes, not tears of pride or vanity, but tears of hope. Hope that transformation was actually possible. Hope that she could become someone new. Hope that her future didn't have to be defined by her past. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me another way to live. But the real test was still coming. The final lesson that would determine whether her transformation was genuine or merely cosmetic. The fading of the marks on Prisca's skin gave her hope she hadn't felt in months. But Auntie Folake was careful to temper that hope with reality. Do not mistake a sign for an ending, the old woman warned one evening as they prepared their simple meal. The path of genuine change always asks one final question. Will you remain humble when pride is offered back to you? Prisca listened carefully, stirring the pot of rice and beans, food she'd learned to cook herself, food she'd learned to be grateful for. What do you mean? Your beauty is returning, Auntie Folake said. Your skin is healing. People are beginning to see you differently. The test is this. When you become beautiful again, when people start admiring you again, when doors start opening again, will you remember who you are now? Or will you return to who you were before? The question hung in the air like smoke. Prisca didn't answer immediately because she genuinely didn't know. How could she know until the moment arrived? Her days continued to be filled with service. She fetched water for those who couldn't. She helped elderly neighbors with their shopping. She fed street children when she had food to share. She cleaned. She served. She listened to people's problems. She offered help without expecting anything in return. But fate had prepared one final, devastating lesson. One evening, a messenger arrived at Auntie Folake's apartment, breathless from running. There's trouble at the construction site near Oshodi, he panted. A child has fallen into an abandoned well. The well is narrow and deep, about 30 feet. The boy is alive but injured. No one can reach him safely. The men are afraid the well will collapse if they try to go down. Prisca's heart jolted violently. How old is the child? About 7 or 8 years, the man replied. His mother is there, crying. They've been trying for 2 hours now. Auntie Folake turned to Prisca slowly, her eyes searching. Do you hear? she asked quietly. Prisca remembered how she once believed she was too precious for danger, too valuable to risk for anyone else. She remembered how she once thought the world existed to serve her, not the other way around. She stood up immediately.
I'll go, she said.
Are you mad? Someone in the gathering crowd outside shouted. You could die down there. The well might collapse, another voice added. It's not worth the risk. Prisca looked at Ani Folake one more time. The old woman nodded slightly, not giving permission, but acknowledging the choice. Prisca pushed through the growing crowd toward Ashadi. By the time she arrived, dozens of people had gathered around the abandoned well, their faces etched with helplessness and fear. A woman, the boy's mother, knelt at the edge, crying hysterically. Please, the mother screamed. Someone help my son. He's all I have. Engineers and construction workers stood nearby, shaking their heads grimly. It's too dangerous, one said. The walls are unstable. If anyone goes down, the whole thing could collapse and kill both of them. Prisca stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. I'll go, she said quietly. The crowd turned to look at her. Some recognized her immediately. Whispers spread. Is that not Prisca? The proud one from Ikoyi? What is she doing here? She's changed, someone else whispered. I've seen her helping people. One of the engineers approached her. Miss, I cannot allow this. The risk is too great. Prisca looked him in the eyes. That child is someone's son. If he was yours, wouldn't you want someone to try? The engineer had no response. They tied a rope around Prisca's waist, the same rope used for construction materials, rough and thick. Her hands shook as they tightened the knot. Her breathing came shallow and fast. Every survival instinct screamed at her to stop, to let someone else try, to preserve her own life. But she thought about that little boy waiting for his mother at the borehole, hungry and alone. She thought about Mrs. Okonkwo, humiliated and broken. She thought about Ani Folake, invisible and dismissed. She thought about every person she'd hurt with her cruelty and pride. This was who she was now. This was who she chose to be. She knelt at the edge of the well. The darkness below seemed infinite, bottomless. She could hear the child whimpering, small, terrified sounds that broke her heart. Hold tight to the rope, the engineer instructed. If you feel the walls shifting, signal immediately, and we'll pull you up. Do you understand? Prisca nodded, not trusting her voice. She descended slowly into the darkness. The walls scraped against her arms. The air grew cooler and damper. Loose earth and rocks cascaded down around her, some pieces hitting her head and shoulders. She could barely see. Hello, she called softly, her voice echoing strangely. I'm coming to help you. Don't be afraid. A small, terrified voice answered through sobs. Please don't leave me. I won't. I promise. Just hold on a little longer. She reached the bottom finally, her feet landing in muddy water. The boy was wedged between the narrow walls, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his face streaked with tears and dirt. She knelt carefully in the small space. It's okay now, she whispered, trying to keep her voice calm despite her own terror. I'm here. We're going together. She wrapped her arms around him gently, supporting his injured leg. Hold on to me, she instructed. Wrap your arms around my neck and don't let go. He obeyed, his small arms clutching her desperately. She signaled upward with 3 sharp tugs on the rope. The rope tightened around her waist. They began rising slowly, agonizingly slowly. The boy whimpered with each movement, his injured leg bumping against the walls. Halfway up, disaster struck. The walls shifted with an ominous grinding sound. Dirt and rocks cascaded down in a sudden rush. The well groaned like a living thing in pain. Faster, someone above shouted. It's collapsing. Hands pulled frantically on the rope. Prisca held the boy tighter, her entire body. Hands pulled frantically on the rope. Prisca held the boy tighter, her entire body shielding him as rocks and debris rained down on her head and shoulders. Sharp pain exploded across her back as larger chunks struck her. She closed her eyes tightly, not in fear, but in surrender. If this is my last act, She thought with perfect clarity, let it be one of love.
Let it be proof that I changed.
The rope jerked violently upward. The walls continued crumbling. For one terrifying moment, Prisca thought they would be buried alive in the collapsing well. Then suddenly, light flooded her eyes. Strong hands reached down. Multiple arms pulled them up and over the edge. They tumbled onto solid ground just as the well behind them collapsed completely with a thunderous roar, sending up a massive cloud of dust. For a moment, the entire crowd stood in stunned silence. Then the boy's mother screamed, not in terror this time, but in overwhelming relief. She ran forward, falling to her knees, clutching her son who was crying but alive. "My baby! My only son," she sobbed, kissing his dusty face over and over, checking him for injuries with trembling hands. People turned to Prisca. She lay on the ground, covered in mud and blood, breathing hard, her body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Someone whispered. "She went into the well. She could have died." Another voice, louder. "She saved that child. She risked her life for someone else's son," a woman said, her voice full of wonder. The crowd stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as the arrogant beauty they'd known, not as the cursed woman they'd watched fall, but as a human being who had chosen love over self-preservation. The child's mother approached Prisca slowly, tears streaming down her face. She knelt beside her in the dust. "You saved my son," she cried. "You risked everything to save my child." Prisca pushed herself up to sitting, wincing at the pain in her back and shoulders. "Please," she said softly, her voice hoarse. "Please don't kneel to me. I'm not above you. I'm not better than you." The words stunned everyone present. Prisca, who once demanded everyone bow to her presence, was now refusing the very honor she'd once craved. That night, Prisca returned to Auntie Folake's apartment barely able to walk. Her entire body ached. Cuts and bruises covered her arms and back. She could barely lift her arms. Auntie Folake cleaned her wounds with gentle hands, applying herbs and bandages. "You chose love over your own life," the old woman said quietly. Prisca said nothing. She was too exhausted to speak, too drained to think. She simply lay down on the thin mat and fell immediately into deep, dreamless sleep. For the first time in months, the nightmares didn't come. She slept deeply, peacefully, as if a great weight had been lifted from her soul. When she woke at dawn, something felt profoundly different. The air seemed lighter somehow. Her body, despite its injuries, felt strangely free. She walked slowly to the small cracked mirror near the wall and froze. Her skin was completely clear. The dark marks had vanished entirely. But this wasn't the same beauty as before. It was different somehow. Deeper. It came from within rather than merely sitting on the surface like makeup. Her eyes looked different too. They held something they'd never held before. Genuine compassion, hard-earned wisdom, authentic humility. She turned to Auntie Folake, tears streaming down her healed face. "It's gone," she whispered. "The curse is gone." The old woman nodded slowly. "The curse ended," she said, "because the heart that created it no longer exists. You are not the same person who insulted me on that street. That Prisca died in that well. This Prisca, the one standing before me, was born there." Prisca dropped to her knees. "Thank you," she said through tears. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me how to be human." Auntie Folake shook her head gently. "Don't thank me, child. You saved yourself. I only showed you the path. You chose to walk it." 3 years later, Prisca stood in a modest office in Surrey, surrounded by women of all ages who had come for training. The sign outside read, "Second Chances Skills Training Center, founded by Prisca Adelik." She no longer lived in Ikoyi. She had chosen to stay in Surrey, in a simple apartment not far from where Auntie Folake once lived. Her father's business had eventually recovered, and he'd offered to restore her to her former luxury. She'd refused. "I don't need luxury," she'd told him. "I need purpose." Now she ran a training center where she taught women marketable skills: sewing, baking, computer literacy, small business management. She employed 15 women permanently and trained dozens more each month. Her transformation had become a story people told across Lagos. Her beauty had fully returned, perhaps even more striking than before, but she wore it differently now. She dressed simply. She greeted everyone warmly. She listened more than she spoke. She valued character over appearance. She had never married. Several good men had shown interest, but she declined them all, not out of pride this time, but because she felt her purpose was larger than romance. She was too busy rebuilding lives, too focused on helping others transform as she had transformed. One afternoon, a thin young girl appeared at her office door. She wore clothes that had been washed too many times. Her eyes held a mixture of hope and fear. "Please, Ma," the girl said hesitantly. "I heard you train people. I want to learn, but I don't have money for fees." Prisca looked at her and saw herself 3 years earlier. Lost, desperate, searching for redemption. "What's your name?" Prisca asked gently. "Blessing, Ma." "Well, Blessing, let me tell you something very important." Prisca stood and approached the girl, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your value has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with your willingness to learn, to grow, to serve others. If you have that willingness, I'll teach you everything I know." The girl's face lit up like sunrise. Tears filled her eyes. "Really, Ma?"
You mean it?
"I mean it absolutely. Come, let me introduce you to the other women." As Prisca led Blessing into the training room, she caught her reflection in a window. For a moment, she saw not just herself, but the ghost of who she'd been, the proud, cruel girl who believed beauty entitled her to mistreat others. Then she blinked, and the ghost vanished. Only the present remained. That evening, as she locked up the center, her phone rang. It was her father. "Prisca, I'm having a business dinner tonight with important clients. They specifically asked if you would join us. They want to meet the daughter who transformed herself and is now transforming others." The old Prisca would have jumped at the opportunity, a chance to be admired, to be the center of attention. The new Prisca checked her schedule. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I have a commitment tonight. I'm teaching evening classes for women who work during the day.
They're depending on me."
Her father chuckled. "You've truly changed. I'll tell them you're busy doing something more important than dinner parties. Thank you for understanding." As she walked through Surulère's crowded streets toward her evening class, people greeted her warmly. Not with fear or obsessive admiration, but with genuine respect. "Good evening, Sister Prisca." "Ma. Thank you for helping my sister find work." "God bless you, Ma." She greeted each person by name, asked about their families, remembered their struggles, and celebrated their victories. She passed the spot where she'd once humiliated Auntie Folake. She stopped there for a moment, as she did every evening, remembering the old woman who had saved her life by cursing it. Auntie Folake had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier in her sleep. Prisca had organized the burial, ensuring the woman who lived invisible finally left this world acknowledged, honored, mourned. At the funeral, Prisca had stood before the small gathering and said, "This woman saved my life by teaching me the hardest lesson I've ever learned, that beauty without compassion is worthless. That pride without love is emptiness. That privilege without service is wasted. She saw something in me worth saving, even when I couldn't see it myself. She believed I could change, even when I didn't believe it. Everything good I do now, I do in honor of her memory." Now, standing on the same spot where her transformation began, Prisca whispered to the empty air, "Thank you, Auntie Folake. Thank you for loving me enough to curse me. Thank you for breaking me so I could be rebuilt correctly." A gentle breeze stirred the Lagos evening, carrying the smell of street food and car exhaust and humanity surviving another day. To anyone watching, it would seem like just wind. But to Prisca, it felt like an answer, like approval, like a blessing from beyond. She smiled and continued walking to her evening class, where 20 women waited to learn not just skills, but the deeper lesson Prisca had learned, that true beauty radiates from the inside out, that genuine wealth is measured in lives touched rather than possessions accumulated, that real success means lifting others as you climb. Years later, when people asked Prisca about her transformation, she would tell them the truth. I thought beauty was my greatest gift, but it was actually my greatest curse because it allowed me to avoid developing character. I thought pride made me strong, but it actually made me weak because I couldn't see my own brokenness. I thought serving myself was wisdom, but it was actually foolishness because I was building a life on sand. The curse I received wasn't punishment. It was mercy. It forced me to become who I was always meant to be. It stripped away everything superficial, so I could discover what was essential. And the greatest irony? When I stopped demanding respect, people began giving it freely. When I stopped chasing beauty, I became truly beautiful. When I stopped trying to be special, I became genuinely valuable. The hands that once refused to carry anyone's burden now carry burdens daily. The voice that once spoke only cruelty now speaks words of encouragement. The heart that once held only pride now holds compassion. And I am more beautiful now, covered in scars, hands roughened by work, face marked by service, than I ever was with flawless skin and perfect features. Because now my beauty means something. Now it serves a purpose beyond my own vanity. The moral. True transformation requires destruction before reconstruction. Beauty without character is a curse disguised as a blessing. Pride creates isolation while humility creates connection. We find our authentic selves not by looking in mirrors, but by looking into the faces of those we serve. And the people who try to break us are sometimes the people saving us from ourselves. Prisca learned that genuine beauty radiates from compassion, that real wealth is measured in lives touched, that true success means using your gifts to lift others. She learned that the greatest power isn't in being admired, it's in being useful. And she learned that sometimes we must lose everything to gain what actually matters. The curse that seemed like an ending was actually a beginning. The humiliation that felt like death was actually rebirth. And the old woman she dismissed as worthless became the instrument of her salvation. If this story touched your heart, remember, you are not defined by your past mistakes but by your willingness to change. Your value isn't in your appearance, but in your character. And it's never too late to choose compassion over cruelty, humility over pride, service over selfishness. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful transformation stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss content that could change your perspective on life. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever had an experience that completely transformed who you are? We'd love to hear your story. Until next time, choose kindness. Choose humility. Choose to see every person as valuable. Because you never know, the person you dismiss today might be the one teaching you the most important lesson of your life tomorrow.